when I was buying fruit in Washington State last year, talking to the vineyards and the wineries, I said, "What's it like going between other states?" And they go, "Ron, we just got to pay $100 registration, and then all they do is they charge the tax when the wine is sold."
Wow.
In France, if you're shipping it from the north to the south, there's no tax. In Italy, from the tip up to the north, up in Milano, there's no tax. In Australia, across the country, no tax. New Zealand. Only in Canada do we have this interprovincial tariff. So I get treated like a foreigner in my own country.
Well, as politicians promise or gaslight us into believing that they are here to put Canadians first and have their elbows up against the Americans with retaliatory measures such as pulling American booze off the shelves to fight Trump tariffs, what if I told you that for some small Canadian business owners within the winery industry, the bigger tariff is actually coming at them from within our own country? That's the grim reality for Ron Kubek, the owner of Lightning Rock Winery in Summerland, British Columbia, and many others like him. Provincial border tariffs make it more expensive for him to sell his Canadian-made wine to Canadians than it is to sell across the border in the U.S., even after a 25% UF tariff is factored in. Take Ontario, for example. For him to sell a bottle of wine that sells for $20 here, by the time it reaches Ontario, it's jacked up for Canadians to buy to $35 or $40, thanks to a crushing 75% markup tariff for crossing into the province. So why not just sell more for less to more people in Washington? That's exactly what Ron Kubek says he's been forced to do, especially since he does not want to fire the Canadians he employs during these hard times. And in this interview, you'll learn about a prominent political figure here in British Columbia whose business is doing the same, according to him.
Thanks, Dre, for having me. We appreciate you shining some light onto a weird situation.
Very weird. I think most people are eager to know exactly how is it when we have premiers and the contenders for the next prime minister saying, hey, we're going to be Canada first, or whatever phrasing they're using. And some of them have, pulled the alcohol from the US off the shelves. How is it still cheaper for you to sell in the US than across our borders within the country?
Well, the only place that is a good deal, but our limited access is in BC. In Alberta to the east coast of Canada, our tariffs or interprovincial tariffs are anywhere from 28 to 140%.
Wow.
With Trump's tariffs, it's only 25%. So we had our first shipment of a pallet of wine go out today to Washington State because they're anxious to get our wine. And from an economic point of view, it's still better. All of the premiers are talking about it, but they're doing nothing. In some cases, like Alberta, they went the opposite way.
Well, tell me about that a little bit. I see you wrote a letter specifically to the Premier, Premier Smith herself, to raise attention about that. Tell us a little bit about what was in the letter and whether or not you got any response.
Well, last year I started the program when they had done a sting operation to wineries like mine that were shipping direct to Alberta. We were allowed to do it under the 2019 federal legislation. And they said, well, you can't sell through the AGLC, the Alberta Government Liquor Corporation, if you are doing direct to consumer sales.
Mm-hmm.
So we continued selling. We just pulled our wine out of the AGLC stores. And then back in May of last year, the Premier of Ontario, of Alberta, and the Premier of BC announced that they had come to an agreement at a hockey game. They didn't announce what they were going to do then until December of last year, and then we were able to sign our papers in January, allowing us to ship to Alberta and sell through the AGLC.
Mm-hmm.
Right after that, the Premier raised the per liter bottle, flat bottle, because Alberta used to have a flat bottle tax from $3.91 to $4.11 a liter. Then she added an ad valorem tax of anywhere from 5 to 15%.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly my $25 bottle of wine is now $6.61 more to our Alberta customers.
Wow.
So she's talking about, oil tariffs and not wanting to do this and standing up for Alberta and standing up for Canada. But on the other hand, she's taxing small family run 3,500 case a year wineries like me and charging us penalty because they don't have any wineries in Alberta. And I sit there and I go, why are they penalizing? They don't penalize Amazon for going in. They don't penalize any of these big companies. But a small company like me that employs Canadians, that, the Okanagan is a place that a lot of Albertans like to visit. They like to come out, they taste our wine in the summertime, or they come out for ski season. They taste the wine and they want to get it back in Alberta. And it boggles the mind that on one hand, she's standing up for Alberta and fighting for a lower tariff for oil. But in the meantime, she's hurting Canadians like me.
So did you get a response or not from her office?
Nothing. I went back and forth last year with the Minister of Red Tape, and then they just stopped. The only premier in Canada that's really doing anything is Doug Ford. Now, he's doing it for Ontario producers. And I do give him credit that I was in touch with him. He got back to me and said, I've got to talk to his Minister of Finance. His Minister of Finance got back to me. And recently, the Minister of Finance staff has reached out and wants to have a dialogue with me. That's more than I can say what's happening in BC and Alberta. And so what Premier Ford did in Ontario when this whole tariff situation said, I'm going to pull all the U.S. alcohol off the shelves. And what he did is he then said, I'm going to open it up to all the craft wineries. I'm also going to open up the access or the stores that can sell it. So now grocery stores, Costco, convenience stores are able to sell craft wine and craft Ontario products.
Right.
And we would love to sell into Ontario, but it's a 71.5% markup plus the other fees make it 75%. Thus, that's why I'm shipping to the U.S. And another thing, Dre, is, when I was buying fruit in Washington State last year, talking to the vineyards and the wineries, I said, what's it like going between other states? And they go, Ron, we just got to pay $100 registration. And then all they do is they charge the tax when the wine is sold. Wow. In France, if you're shipping it from the north to the south, there's no tax. In Italy, from the tip up to the north, up in Milano, there's no tax. In Australia, across the country, no tax. New Zealand. Only in Canada do we have this interprovincial tariff. So I get treated like a foreigner in my own country.
And so since I'm the BC Bureau Chief Reporter, can you break down a little bit about, what Premier Eby's sort of response to all of this is? I know you're saying for now, you guys are only going to be selling to BC and Washington, if I'm not mistaken, because it makes the most sense to do so. But how has his plan with all of this gone, since he's been a big proponent of pulling American alcohol off the shelves?
Well, apparently 3 emails over the last 3 months has gotten me banned or considered harassment for asking questions of our provincial government or specifically of the BCLDB. One of the things I had suggested to him about ways that he could solve it was following Premier Ford's model of opening up the access. If you go into a BC liquor store right now, a government one run, you're going to see empty shelf space with where the California and other wines were. Why not replace it with BC wines?
Yeah, no brainer.
Why not open up access? We're in one of BC's most well-known grocery store chains. They have 22 liquor licenses. They have 115 stores. They would love to have more. But because of a lobby group has lobbied the BC government, and both, I guess it started off with Socreds and then Socreds, NDP, back to Liberal, and now NDP again. They have a moratorium until 2032 on any new liquor licenses. So this grocery store chain, which has done a great job and one of BC's biggest success stories, would like to expand. We've got 5 wines in 22 of their stores. They have 115 stores. I'd love to have 5 different wines in 115 stores. And for you, in BC, wouldn't it be nice to be able to go to the grocery store or go to the Costco and get the same access that they do in Ontario?
Yeah.
But why not? And so we've got a government that will put cannabis stores on every corner. We'll put them right next to each other. We'll do all that. There's no limit on that. But for wine that is produced here in BC by Canadians, I have only, Canadian born and raised staff.
Right.
I buy local wherever I can. Why aren't we opening it up? I mean, I made a suggestion about how we could open up the market. Why aren't we doing it? And they didn't like that. And then, I'm having a conflict. Last year, you're probably aware that we, all of the Okanagan lost all of its fruit, not only just grapes, but cherries, peaches, everything else.
Yes.
The BC government waited until July 28th to give us an answer on whether we were going to get an exemption on bringing in Washington State fruit. And so what we were looking for was an exemption on last year's wine and saying, okay, we don't want to have to pay the 89% markup, because if we get it in, if I buy the wine outside of that markup exemption period, I have an 89% markup on my wine, even though it's made in Canada. And so the BCLDB, they said, okay, fine, we'll give you a markup on last year, but we're going to base it on what you sold over the last 5 years, and we're going to include everything that you had in inventory. So wine that I've got in the barrel, wine that I've got, we do a lot of sparkling that's in glass for 2 or 3 years on the lees or the dead yeast, is now included in this markup. So I can't grow my business because I'm in danger of then putting myself into an 89% tax in BC. I mean, a simple thing would have been, hey, Ron, you had no fruit in 24. We'll let you have a markup exemption to bring in fruit up to what you had made the year before on that fruit. That would have been simple to someone like you or me. But they said, no, we're going to try and tax everything that you've got in the warehouse. So, I don't want a handout. I didn't ask for a handout. All I've asked is the government to get out of my way. I know how to make money. My other business does very well. And so all I'm trying to do is say, okay, here, let's open it up so that British Columbians around BC can get wine where they shop and make it easier to get access to. And for those of us that lost fruit last year, instead of penalizing us and saying everything you had done before is now going to be potentially taxable, why not just say, hey, you can bring in fruit from Washington State? Because I drove 11,500 kilometers last September, October, going back and forth to Washington State, bringing up grapes, Dre, so that my staff had jobs. I didn't lay anybody off. I made wine so that our restaurants and liquor stores throughout BC could have wine for this year. And now if we try and grow our business by selling off some of our past vintages, we're in danger of being taxed 89%.
Wow. And I don't know why, but this is coming to my head so much when I hear about your plight. I can't believe it's actually happening, because free fentanyl for all public health officer Dr. Bonnie Henry has a winery. And we know that during lockdown, she shut down many places, but not the winery. So I'm surprised to learn that her company is getting a hit too.
Yeah, I mean, for people who brought wine in from the States, brought grapes in like her, they're getting hit. But, she's one of a few that I know, 4 of us that are shipping wine into the United States. And, as much as I disagreed with her whole vaccine stance, I was very glad that she owned part of a winery during COVID, because I was able to stay open. And I was able to keep people employed. So I'm not going to complain about that.
More than just you should have been open. But, it was just interesting because she owned one. So you're saying that she is shipping wine to the U.S. And how do you know that?
Well, she has an agent that is shipping it. Her winemaker up there is a wonderful gentleman. She makes, she's just a small investor in it,
right.
But, her winemaker is a phenomenal gentleman. He makes very good wine. I enjoy it. And, they're shipping to the U.S. the same person that we're shipping to the U.S. And so she's realized, I don't know if she's even aware of it, but I'm sure that her business people are aware of it, that, it's easier to ship to the U.S. than it is to the rest of Canada. She was well thought of across Canada, which is awesome for her and, the wine. But like me, she's like, or her business people are going, it just doesn't make sense to ship to the rest of Canada. And I would love to ship to the rest of Canada. I mean, there's 15 million people in Ontario. And we've got some that have reached out and said, hey, Ron, can we get some of your wine for a BC wine bar? And I go, I can't sell it that cheap. Quebec is even harder than, with 132% markup to go into Quebec. I mean, Quebec gives French wines a better deal than they do for BC wines.
It reminds me a little bit about how, of course, it is troublesome to learn about the threats and the tariffs being imposed, but people seem to be okay with or sort of numb to the carbon tax that's been assaulted against us for so long up until recently. And that's what I feel like is happening to you. You're shedding light on something that the average Canadian doesn't realize. We know we get taxed unnecessarily, and you and your industry is a perfect example. So thanks for coming on Rebel News to shed light. Let us know if you hear any more developments, if there's any more changes happening, or if the taxes get any higher, or the tariffs or anything like that. But very thankful for you for fighting for this to keep Canadians having jobs. And yeah, I would like BC wine to make it across Canada. I'm sure people visiting Canada would appreciate that too.
Well, my presentation to Ontario is, hey, how about if BC doesn't have its 89% markup, you don't have your 75% markup, and people in Ontario and BC can still benefit. The government's still going to make their sales tax. I mean, what people in BC don't realize is anything that's not from BC has an 89% markup, and then they charge you another 10% at the till on top of that tax. So you're getting a tax on a tax. And so I'm saying, hey, to BC and Ontario, let's get rid of the markup between the provinces. You can still get your sales tax, but maybe we should try and live within our means instead of taxing the crap out of Canadians like we are. Between Trudeau's excise tax, the carbon tax, Carney says that he's taken off the tax, but all he's going to do is replace it on the oil companies. And you and I both know that they're not going to eat it. They're just going to pass it down. So, if we don't get a change in government, the carbon taxes by this time next year will probably be double what they just were that came off today.
It's a scary thought what's going on. Thank you for being on Rebel News.
Thanks, Dre.
Well, despite such high tariffs coming from within our own country to Canadians, the federal election is very focused on the American tariffs. And if you want reports you can trust on everything to do with elections and the tariffs connected to it, please go to our special website called campaign2025.com for more information and to donate to keep those reports going strong.